All right, so welcome to the Fire Adapted Landscaping and Defensible Space class. My name is Brian Hendricks, I'm Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator. Thank you for joining. All right. So this class is presented by Fire Adapted Ashland in collaboration with Ashland Fire and Rescue and the Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission. We are partners with Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and Firewise USA, which is an NFPA's program. I wanted to give a special thanks today to Sharice Sidoriak, who is also on this webinar to help answer questions in the chat about plants and other aspects of this class that just help support throughout this process. A lot of the research we've done recently to update a lot of our best practices has been done through a lot of her research. So it's really great she's here with us today. Sarah Jones, who has already introduced herself, is our Community Engagement Coordinator for Ashland Forest Resiliency. She's helping us on the technical issues, so if you have any questions, she'll be there in the chat to help you out. And also wanted to thank Libby Van Wy with North Mountain Park Nature Center. She is the manager there with Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission. She helped set up the class for us and signed up probably about 50 of you. So thanks to her too for all this help. So the title of this said Firewise Landscaping. And so if you see the Fire Adapted Landscaping and Defensible Space, wait a minute, you're not in the wrong class. You are in the right place. The National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, trademarked the term Firewise for their Firewise USA Communities program. Over time, this word became synonymous with many different wildfire mitigation and preparedness best practices, kind of like Kleenex or Q-tips being generally used to describe facial tissues or cotton swabs. Firewise is generally used to mean being adequately prepared for the possibility of wildfire, but not quite accurate enough. Thus, the industry came up with Fire Adapted as a term coined to better differentiate between NFPA's program and the broader concepts of community wildfire preparedness. So you're going to be hearing both words more often. Wildfire prevention and preparedness stakeholders have been moving away from the word Firewise and utilizing Fire Adapted instead. And a fire adapted community is defined by the United States Forest Service as a knowledgeable and engaged community in which the awareness and actions of residents regarding infrastructure, buildings, landscaping, and the surrounding ecosystem lessens the need for extensive protection actions and enables the community to safely accept fire as a part of the surrounding landscape. So what does that mean? So a fire adapted community is aware of their wildfire risk. You know, we understand how that risk translates to our homes, other properties, infrastructure, and the businesses. We take responsibility for our wildfire risk by adapting the way we design, build, and live within these areas. Because the true test is whether we can survive wildfire with little or no assistance from firefighters. And why is being a fire adapted community important? Well, the reality today is that fire agencies cannot solve the problem alone. Firefighters do not have the resources to defend every home during a wildfire. Personal responsibility is key. Residents can take steps to reduce their risks. We know that using Firewise best practices and wildfire mitigation strategies can increase the likelihood of our homes surviving a wildland fire threat. The truth is, wildfire is an element of nature. Although fire can be highly destructive, particularly where property and life are concerned, it is important to recognize that fire performs a vital role in the ecosystem. It is important to understand this because it is the context in which land management agencies make their decisions about fire management. We could spend this entire discussion just talking about fire's role in the ecosystem, but since we have a landscaping topics to cover, let's focus on three key thoughts. Fire can replenish soil nutrients, remove dead and dying vegetation, and create the conditions for healthy regrowth. However, our topics today are focusing on when wildfires happen close to our urban landscape. and how to mitigate the risks associated with living in a wildland-urban interface. We cannot prevent wildfires from happening, but we can prevent consequences of those fires upon our communities. Community preparedness starts at home. In our efforts to become more Firewise, or fire adapted in Ashland, we need your help. We all have a role to play, and it starts with being our community members. Each of us, no matter our role to this town, is a member of our community wildfire adaptation efforts. Federal and state land managers are taking care of the public lands, but it is our individual responsibility to reduce the hazards in our private property. Research tells us that if we really want to reduce the risk of wildfire threats to our homes, we need to focus on our own yards, on the home and its immediate surroundings. Today, I will cover a series of best practices for fire-reluctant landscaping and the creation of defensible space that individuals and neighbors can take to reduce vulnerability to wildfire and some home hardening guidance. And I like this quote: with adequate planning and cooperation among varying interests, wildfires can occur without disastrous loss of life, property, and resources. Before we look at what we can do to reduce our risks, let's first consider what makes homes ignite. Let's start with the first side of the fire triangle. Fire is a chemical reaction that starts with lightning, lava, or a match, which is usually human caused, not just the match. Heat is propagated or transferred from one body to another through conductive, convection, and radiation. Convective heating occurs when an object is heated by rising air. Conductive heating occurs when an object is in direct contact with a heated item. And radiated heating occurs when a heated object makes another object heat up through energetic transfer. So how does this look? Convective heating occurs when an object is heated by rising air. So any fire fuels directly under a portion of a structure become an exposure risk. Combustible storage under decks or eaves of your roof, vegetation that is large, poorly managed, or highly flammable, and wood connections to your home, like fences, are all things to look out for and work to remedy as soon as possible to reduce risk. So these are some convective heating exposure examples of, like on the right, there's a mitigated space where they took care of everything under their eaves, and same at the bottom under the deck. They cleaned out all the debris and don't have any vegetation there. And the other is where you see flammable plants right against the walls of buildings, or a wood fence that's right under an eave. These are all things to evaluate and consider modifying or removing. Like the wood fence, you can maybe go with a metal fence or remove that fence section altogether if it's unnecessary. Or with the flammable plants, we recommend just removing them that close to the property because of those three ways heat transfers to another object, and these objects are our dwellings. So conductive heating occurs when an object is in direct contact with a heated item. For example, it's on fire, right? So this is what everybody typically thinks about a wildfire coming through town, is a big wall of flame leading from the large trees to the smaller vegetation to our homes. We have ways to mitigate that, and that's part of what we'll be talking about today, because a direct flame contact, a big wall of flame moving through town is not the biggest chance of a fire starting around your house or your house burning down. Embers are. But direct flame contact exposures, which are conductive heating, do you have established clear space between nearby combustibles and your home? So the first 5 to 10 feet around a structure is the most critical. What leads up to this critical zone matters. Prioritize initial work within the first 5 to 10 feet of your home to mitigate immediate risks. And this includes debris, smaller ornamental vegetation growing against walls, storage you may have crammed between a fence and a wall or next to a shed in the house. All those little things are within that 0 to 10 foot from the dwelling that you should really pay attention to, because that can provide conductive heating to your home, direct flame contact if they catch fire. And radiant heating occurs when a heated object makes another object heat up through energetic transfer. So any combustibles, including accessory structures, wood piles, and storage, need to be evaluated so you can mitigate the risk of it catching fire and threatening the home from radiant heat. So are there any radiant heat risks around your home? Large, highly flammable vegetation, especially any close to windows, fences or neighboring buildings in close proximity? What kind of risks are within your control to mitigate or modify to reduce the risk? You may be able to tell that many of these examples I've just shown pose more than one type of risk exposure for heat transfer, and you're right. These are some of the challenges in addressing the complexities in fire behavior within wildland-urban interface communities. So wind-blown embers are the primary cause of wildfire ignitions within communities. The embers ignite combustibles that lead to the 3 different types of heat transfer to a dwelling or accessory structure. And once one structure ignites, the probability for nearby structures also igniting drastically increases. We are not just working to prevent our own homes from catching fire. We are working to prevent any homes from catching fire. Individual responsibility is a collective obligation in our efforts to become a fire-adapted Ashland. What this tells us is that the in-betweens matter a lot. All the in-betweens between our homes, our accessory structures, our storage, our cars, it's very important. To appreciate why certain recommendations are made relative to fire-resistant landscaping, it's a good idea to have a foundation in fire dynamics. The first fundamental is to understand how fire works. The fire triangle on this slide shows 3 things that must be present for fire to occur: an ignition source, heat, fuel, and oxygen. The chain reaction is what we are working to prevent or hinder. In addition to reviewing the fundamentals of fire dynamics, I will cover the primary and secondary causes of ignition, why urban environments are particularly susceptible to intense, fast-spreading wildfire, and the reason for designating HIZs. So the second leg of the fire triangle is oxygen. If the air mass is still, burning is primarily accomplished through conductive heating. When the air mass is moving, wind, combustion is facilitated by conductive, convective, and radiant heating. An important factor in the behavior of the Almeida fire was the abundance of oxygen caused by strong, sustained winds. And fuel is the third leg of the fire triangle. Homes in the urban landscape are fuel, as are the landscapes that surround them. And in an urban environment, there's a lot of different types, especially with Ashland. Whether it's debris, flammable plants, or just mass plantings and overgrown shrubs, all of that plays a part in the chances of our homes catching fire. So causes of ignition. Embers are the primary ignition source for fires to start in an urban environment. Embers, also known as firebrands, are the spark that can ignite fuels as far as 1 to 3 miles away from the active flaming fire. So a blizzard of embers, like the embers shown in the left-hand pictures within testing facilities, can bombard your property with thousands and thousands of firebrands. Any receptive fuel can then burst into flame, as shown in the gutter of this house and next to the wall of the house. So remember the examples I showed right before of all that debris or flammable vegetation. Embers can land on that, and that's why it's so critically important to keep those things away from the home. The second phase of ignition is caused by latent heating when many embers over time dry out combustible materials, like the bark mulch shown here. And when beginning to smolder, they can dry out any overlying shrubs also. So over minutes or even hours of ember exposures or smoldering, even fire-reluctant plants and shrubs can dry out, causing them to ignite. Plants and shrubs that are close to structures can generate conductive, convective, and radiant heat to the structure, leading to possible ignition of the structure. In situations where an ember storm is inundating a large area, firefighting resources will not be able to stop the ignition of all the homes in the community due to both causes of ignition. So why do some homes succumb to a wildfire and others don't? Sometimes it has to do with luck. Other times it's due to local air eddies, such as what happens in the eye of a hurricane. And other times it's due to a property owner's personal investment in preparing their property. To better understand urban environment vulnerabilities, it's necessary to talk about what drives fire behavior. The fire behavior triangle graphically shows the three components which drive fire behavior: weather and climate, topography, and fuels. Of the three, weather and climate is the most variable, least predictable, and least controllable by humans. Fuel is a component shared by both triangles. Topography is the third leg of the fire behavior triangle. I will focus briefly on elements of fire and topography that are fundamental to why homes burn in an urban environment and have some examples to show for those. Urban fuels consist of densely packed homes surrounded by vegetation. This situation creates a large fuel load. In addition, urban homes and landscapes contain vast quantities of highly volatile materials in many shapes and sizes. What makes the urban environment unique in many ways is how the fuels are arranged horizontally and vertically. Remember our previous examples being so close to structures? This is the fuel arrangement, also referred to as fuel types, we are working to change. Appreciating how fuel components affect ignition potential and fire spread and intensity can help you better design and maintain a fire-resistant landscape. Large areas of bark mulch, vegetation that grows together, or creating a continuous line of fuel, or wood fence lines, are all types of horizontally continuous fuels. In some circumstances, these can also be referred to as surface fuels, though their size and what else they are adjacent to could also make them ladder fuels, which I'll explain in a moment. What I'm showing first is ground fire in a control burn within New Jersey. But I want you to notice how small that fire is, how slow it is moving. It is currently in real time, and how this is something you can walk away from. This is something that's defendable. And I want you to show in the next clip, pay attention to the pink squares where you'll notice when they come up, the fire burns out when it hits a bare area. And so ground fire is the fire we would rather have near our homes, near our community, and near our, any business or home, because ground fires can be put out or go out by themselves with the proper mitigation strategies around our homes. And after seeing how ground fire burns with very little fuel load on the ground, seeing some of these examples of horizontally continuous fuel around our town, you'll notice that these fuels are a lot higher and denser. And so you're going to get a lot more heat generated if they start burning. Most of the examples I will show you today are of areas in town that have already been mitigated. These are things that we have taken care of over the past few years. Most of them, and some of them are still being worked on. And so don't freak out if you think all these things are still in existence now. Many of them have been mitigated, which is great. Progress. All right. So vertically continuous fuel load is usually created by the vegetation around our homes. Shrubs and trees often containing abundant dead fuels, and during the height of fire season, relatively low live fuel moisture in their leaves. The spreading ground fire transfers heat to shrubs and small trees, which through direct flame contact or convective and radiant heating carries the fire into the canopy of the trees and eaves of the house. This is referred to as a ladder effect, and this type of vegetation configuration is referred to as ladder fuel. In the picture to the left, the vegetation is close enough to the windows of the first and second stories of the house that regular window glass can break at 170 degrees. These windows would likely break if that vegetation caught fire, allowing embers and heat to ignite the interior, possibly before the fire even climbs into the nearby tree. So here we have an example of ladder fuel. So small fires start on the ground, typically in grass, dry vegetation of dry grass, dry leaves, pine needles, things accumulating around the walls of your home, which allows small fire to turn into bigger fire because it starts going into the other vegetation. So as it spreads into larger and larger vegetation, and the examples on the left are just some of the things we see as ladder fuels, flammable shrubs under flammable trees, for instance. It will keep moving up because heat rises, remember? And fire gains in intensity if there's enough fuel there and oxygen. So as it gets higher and higher, we see that there are many things in our community that can create a lot of heat if they start burning. You know, even under the trees and the stuff growing into them, all of that is considered ladder fuel, which is something we should truly mitigate around our homes. Because the ladder could be leading to your house. You know, and so what you have right next to your home is truly important, because we don't want any home to burn, because it drastically increases the probability that the homes next to it will start burning as well. So the fuel components I just described are why spacing matters. How we space our vegetation is critical to keeping fire small and on the ground. So note that a 2-foot tall shrub can generate enough convective heat to ignite vegetation 6 feet above the shrub. That is why you will hear me recommend that mature conifer trees have their lower limbs pruned up 10 feet from the ground and not have flammable vegetation under the drip line of these trees, and fire-reluctant plants kept short to provide effective clearance. So I am about to show another video clip of a prescribed fire where they captured a crown fire on video. Besides noticing how much faster and more intense this type of fire behaves, I would like you to pay attention to how many embers or firebrands are released ahead of the flame front. Crown fires are what the Ashland Forest Resiliency Project has worked to prevent within our watershed, keeping fire on the ground and out of the canopies. Within the forests around our town, this will help reduce the amount of firebrands lofted into the air and into town if we do have a forest fire up in our watershed. Similar to the Caldor fire in Tahoe, once the large flames of 120 feet tall hit the areas that were thinned, those flames dropped to 15 feet, which means they were able to be dealt with by fire officials and better able to protect the Lake Tahoe basin. And so some pink triangles will come up on this one as well to show you where all these little fire starts you can see in front of the flame front are already burning before the main wall of fire gets there. This is a miniature version of an entire forest fire and a community nearby it. That white piece of board they have on the right side might be what you would call a community on a miniature scale, and that large wildfire that you're seeing could be a whole entire forest burning next to it. The flames are much more intense when there is more fuel on the ground and the ladder fuels that lead up into the canopy. This is the type of fire we do not want. Crown fires are the ones that are going to produce the most heat and firebrands coming off of it. So crowns are the tops of trees, also called canopies. When fire reaches this level, it becomes a high intensity, fast moving fire. These are the most difficult to control. Research shows homes must be within 100 feet of the flames to be directly ignited by a crown fire. But what gets to the homes here are firebrands. The firebrands are the burning embers that can be carried up to a mile or more on strong winds. And they are what cause the start the spot ignitions away from the main fire. It's these firebrands that put most homes at risk during a high intensity fire. Fire behavior is also strongly affected by terrain or topography. The direction a hill faces affects the amount of sunlight it receives. Generally, south-facing slopes receive more sunlight. That leads to drier fuels. A wildfire burning on a south-facing aspect is likely to be more intense because of greater radiant heating and naturally drier conditions. The contours of the land around your home will affect fire behavior. We do need to mitigate these properly. Be aware of what's on your side of the fence or maybe on the other side of the fence and see what you can do about it. As a community, we are working to address all these concerns, including in public lands. But even in neighborhoods, HOAs, we can all work together to achieve a better end result and become more fire adapted. So slope affects how fuels are heated. On steep slopes, the fuels are tilted toward the flaming front, making it much easier for the preheating and drying of fuels just ahead of the fire. This preheating of fuels allows fires to move much more quickly up slopes than down. Slope affects how fuels are heated. So in mitigating your slopes, you want to thin out that vegetation so that that fire cannot get as intense. One option is also including a retaining wall on your slope that helps deflect the radiant heat moving up the slope away from the house. And here is an example of some mitigated slopes around town where we've cut out blackberry in a lot of these places, overgrown vegetation, dry grasses and weeds. All of these things on these slopes help protect the homes that are nearby. So with fire-resistant landscaping, the characteristics of the least and most flammable plants will be covered. Landscaping best practices and fire-resistant landscaping design. And we'll go over a little bit about plant selection. But for all of this, no matter what the plant, where it is placed, and how they are maintained are more important than the type of plant selected. Proper plant care and maintenance are critical to mitigate our wildfire risks. That's because all plants will burn. If they can dry out or because they're exposed to radiant heat, they can still burn. So good plants are considered fire reluctant. Bad plants are considered flammable. The ugly ones are explosively flammable. So the characteristics of fire reluctant, low flammability plants. They do not usually retain dead leaves except when in the process of shedding leaves, are small or open in form and do not accumulate dead twigs or branches. They do not have waxy, oily, resinous, or odorous leaves, have high soap, salt, and water content during fire season, and are not prone to disease and can survive higher average temperatures in the future. The bad plants, which are moderately and highly flammable plants, they are typically massive, sprawling, or dense in structure. They retain dead materials. They have papery or shreddy bark, fine leaves or needles. They contain volatile oils, waxes, terpenes, and other flammable chemicals, or have an invasive habit. And the ugly ones, not visually, but just ugly in a fire sense, they ignite quickly and often burn explosively, which means they burn fast and they burn hot. They contain a lot of fuel or other volatile oils, waxes, and terpenes. Examples of these types of plants are bamboo, pampas grass, mast ornamental grasses, brooms like Scotch broom, any arborvitae, juniper, cedar, or cypress. Even the dwarf varieties are highly flammable and not recommended around our structures. So fire-resistant landscaping best practices. This list is available at fireadaptedashland.org. Shri Sidoriak did a wonderful job helping us refine our list here for this. But you should follow plant siting guidelines that are recommended in hazard ignition zones. Remove flammable vegetation within 30 feet of structures and from under trees and shrubs. Avoid planting anything within 5 feet of structures. Any plant really has a potential to burn, and so having it within 5 feet of any structure is not recommended. If you do have it there, it needs to be small and well maintained. Plant only fire-reluctant plants within 10 feet of structures, because if you do not have a non-combustible siding on your home, like if you have wood siding, you should really be thinking of it as a 0 to 10 foot zone, not a 0 to 5 foot zone, because that 0 to 5 feet, a lot of the fire science is based off a cement board style wall siding, or better, to resist the heat that might be from something burning within 5 to 10 feet. Emphasize plants that do not grow over 2 feet high within the 30-foot zone of your house. That keeps fire low to the ground. Remember the videos. Plant deciduous trees and shrubs sparingly within 30 feet. So you shouldn't be surrounding the entire house with them. Be sparing. No evergreen shrubs or trees within 10 feet of the home. Keep these out of that close proximity of the home zone. Eliminate combustible mulches within 30 feet of structures whenever possible. So if you can't eliminate them completely, because a lot of people did that lawn replacement and they just threw a bunch of bark mulch on the ground, it's in one continuous sheet that fire can spread through and get to your home. So break it up. Start at the first 5 feet of the home, get that bark mulch away, and then try to break up that bark mulch elsewhere on the property through walking paths made of stone, crushed gravel, pavers, something else that creates those small little fire breaks that ground fire can end up stopping. Oops, let me finish that off real quick. Isolate planted areas by outlining with non-combustibles. Avoid mass plantings. Keep the soil and plants vigorous and healthy, which means keep them watered as much as they need. But if it's a very thirsty plant, consider replacing it with something more drought tolerant. Selecting the right plants is crucial around your home. Because the right plants are well adapted to local conditions. They don't retain dead leaves. They do not accumulate dead twigs and branches. They do not have the oily, waxy, resinous, or odorous leaves. They do have high salt contents, soap contents, or latex contents, which make them more fire resistant. They have high water content throughout fire season and are not prone to disease and do not have invasive quality. Now, with the combustible mulches that I just talked about, some burn hotter than others, but shredded rubber is one that you should not ever have near your house. It is the most flammable and gives off the most intense heat. It doesn't spread as fast, but you'll notice on the graph that it produces the highest flame heights and the highest temperatures. Pine needles are second as far as the rating because they spread so quickly. The temperature is not as hot, but fire will travel through them very quickly, just like with shredded Western red cedar. The medium pine bark nuggets, or what you see here as Tahoe chips, are basically the smaller nuggets you might buy at any local do-it-yourself shop. Oops. Keep hitting the clicker. Composted wood chips, which is something that has been broken down slightly, are the best to use if you're going to use them at all, because they burn slower. They typically smolder instead of producing a flame height. And so using something like that is a better ideal than the large chip bark mulch if you're going to use it. So cautionary notes. Siting recommendations listed are usually for flat terrain. On almost any reference you look for siting plants when it comes to hazard ignition zones and defensible space around your home. So on a slope of 10 to 20%, the distances should be doubled where shrubs are concerned. On a 20 to 40% slope, the distance should be 4 times greater. On a 40% slope, the distance between plants should be 6 times further. Species within the same genus do not necessarily have equivalent fire resistance. Assess each species individually. The plant size and growth form can make a big difference. So again, the maintenance is key. The landscaper's job is never done. Where plants are placed and how they are maintained is more important than the type of plant selected. Proper plant care and continual maintenance is critical. So in fire-reluctant landscape design, your landscaping based off desired values, the shape of the land, and what we need to include more often is the fuel components of the plants. Lower fire hazards have small amounts of fuel present, which means less plants, smaller plants. The large size fuels that are greater than 3 inches in diameter, which would be trees or larger shrubs, can withstand heat. Oh, wait, there I go again. Can withstand heat a little bit better than the smaller diameter fine combustible fuel. And so that's where grasses that are dry burn faster than a well-pruned madrone or manzanita, because they are larger, so it takes more energy to burn. Choosing the right plants for Northern Nevada high fire hazard areas is where we got this information. It's at the University of Nevada Extension. The link down here, I recommend checking out. University of Nevada does a lot of great research around wildfire. But making sure you're aware of the moisture content of your plants you're planting, how you're arranging them vertically or horizontally, keeping them well spaced instead of continuous will help. Low growing, dense and compact fuels would be better closer to the home, but not right against it. And what the chemical content of those plants are, again, matters. Read the tags before you buy. Common values and desired and developed landscape is beauty and fragrance, habitat for food or food for pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. They require little water to thrive and are drought tolerant. The plants improve the soil health over time, produce edibles for humans, are deer resistant, or easy to grow and maintain. Because we all have busy lives, we don't want to spend all day managing our garden. And with the changing climate, we do have to be aware of how much water use we have and what types of plants we're planting and whether they can withstand all that dry soil. So in creating a Firewise landscape and defensible space, sometimes we're starting with a big mess. We have a lot of debris, excessively planted vegetation, or just vegetation that has grown up and volunteered over time. So you have a lot of massed plantings. And this was a common situation we had, 20, 30 years ago or longer, when homes started burning and we started doing a lot more research. And what we realized is that in certain distances, we can keep the homes from burning because we keep the direct flame contact away from the home. This is where home ignition zones came into being. So these are NFPAs, home ignition zones. This is what we use here in Ashland and in most of Oregon as reference. It is the immediate zone, which is 0 to 5 feet from the structure and includes the structure itself. So that immediate zone includes your roof, your walls, your decks, and everything at least 5 feet out from it. But again, if you have wood siding, a wood shake siding especially, I would increase that distance to 10 feet for that immediate zone. The intermediate zone is the next step out, which is 5 to 30 feet. This is, for a majority of people in the suburbs, the extent of your property. It goes about 30 feet or less, and then you run out of space you control. But if you do have a larger property, or you're part of an HOA that has common areas, you may be able to affect what that extended zone looks like outside of 30 feet. And that can be out 100 to 200 feet, depending on the topography and vegetation makeup of your area. But as a neighborhood, you're looking for around every house 100 feet out. So that's where you have interlapping circles of influence with each other. And that's why it is a community effort, even though we are all individually responsible for our own property. Now, with trees also, you want fewer trees around the house. They can get more dense the farther out you get from a home. And this applies also to neighborhoods and the entire community. We want less flammable trees really close to the homes. We can put those out farther away. We can group them tighter farther away, because we don't want those ladder fuel effects. We don't want canopy fires. We don't want too many trees producing too much debris falling all over our homes, because that's also a constant maintenance issue. So selectively take care of your trees. Here's a quick example of just in a field where trees are pruned up on the upper left-hand corner. You'll notice in all of these, they're removing the ladder fuels. They're removing the dead branches, the low branches. And in these cases, it's only short-cut grass or bare dirt underneath them. And, you know, some of these trees, like in the middle of the oak orchard here, it's just grass. Oaks are more resilient to, you know, ground fires like this compared to a grouping of conifers here, so that they don't have to be pruned up 10 feet, where the conifers in the upper left, you would want that kind of height, especially if there's any sort of ladder fuel underneath it, like a shrub. So with fire-resistant landscaping, we do have plant lists available. So if you have questions about specific plants, check out fireadaptedashland.org. We are currently trying to load more resources on there, including an updated plant list and a plant selector generator that Sharice developed, but we don't have it on there yet. So stay tuned for that one. But as we look at the landscape surrounding a home, we look again to our zones. Recall from a few minutes ago that the home ignition zone includes the home in relation to its surroundings within 100 to 200 feet. From a landscape perspective, the area closest to the home needs the most attention and the use of Firewise concepts. As we extend to the outer zones, there is less danger of a fire igniting a home. Again, a fire farther away, what we're worried about is the ember it's producing getting blown to the home, or a radiant heat issue, if it's hot enough, affecting the home because of its proximity. So in this, that 0 to 5 foot zone is recommended to be non-combustible, which is that blue line you're seeing here. That allows for really no fire to be there. And in an ember storm, it is your house itself withstanding the embers, because if it's debris free, the embers are the only thing there. And so they would take a significant more amount of accumulation to affect the larger lumber in a deck or the siding on a wall or the roof line. If there's no debris there, it's only the ember that can generate the heat. There's no fine fuels or kindling. And this is a common thing with neighbors, is that we have homes next to each other within 30 feet. So again, that's why the 0 to 5 feet matters so much, because we may have only 10 to 20 feet between homes. If each resident does their part on their property, it drastically improves the safety between those homes, preventing them from igniting as easily, especially if one of them does happen to burn. That open space can help firefighters protect the other home, put out the fire on the one that's burning, and get access to the property, as well as just making it a safer space so that there isn't a lot of fire there, because you're protecting windows, fence lines, storage, several different things. So pay attention to this in between. A lot of people tend to put storage or things they don't use very often. They plant shrubs for privacy screening. A lot of those and some of the other photos you'll see are arborvitaes, things that really shouldn't be between homes this close to each other. But you're also noticing that the vegetation, you can tell, is spaced out. That is an important component of keeping fire low on the ground and low intensity, so that it can burn where it is, but smolder out when it reaches that 0 to 5 foot zone, because there's nothing there to bring that fire any closer to the home. So again, spacing matters. The shrubs you have, the trees you have, pay attention to how your property is laid out, where your buildings are. Do you have accessory structures? Is it wood shake siding like the one here on the left? These are the types of things we have to be aware of and do more to maintain, to protect ourselves and our community from wildfire, because it's the ember intrusion blowing in from a nearby fire that's going to cause a lot of the problems for us within town. So these are some examples in the 0 to 10 foot landscaping zone. A lot of these photos are from the same house, because this guy went bananas and did a really great job within that 0 to 5 foot zone, protecting his home. But you'll notice things like metal connection fences to the house itself, because he does have wood siding. A 5 foot zone of rock, which for him worked fine. For others, you might not want that type of rock. Some prefer a larger round rock, or something that won't be raked away or blown away during regular maintenance and getting leaves and needles off the ground. So do some research, figure out what works for you. I like the picture in the upper right here, where there's this recession because there are a lot of slopes in Ashland. They're making everything between the retaining wall and the wall of the home, debris free and vegetation free. So it is a non-combustible space. And the vegetation that is right there above the retaining wall is low and green. So there isn't a lot of accumulation because it's being maintained. So that is a ground fire that you saw in the video that it can be stopped with the retaining wall. In the lower left, you see a larger rock example within that 5 foot zone being used. The bunch grasses are still kind of concerning, but they are well spaced. So they don't have 20 of them right there in one area. So be aware of that, because they also have stone siding there, which can help resist a lot of radiant heat. But their vegetation choice here is much better than a lot of other homes, to where it's small and well spaced. And be aware of the storage in the very bottom center. You notice that they do have some storage there. It isn't a bunch of combustible stuff, not old lumber or anything else that's highly flammable. And it's on a non-combustible surface. And also in this, with home hardening, pay attention to the corners of your home, around your garage. Make sure there's nothing there that can ignite. In the bottom right, you see this guy added an extra 1/8 inch metal mesh screen to the crawl space fence, and made sure he protected it around the cables going through that screen, so that windblown embers can't get in there, because the 1/8 inch metal mesh does the best to keep ember out from under the house or in your attics. And I recommend checking all screens on your house at least once a year. Initially, before fire season, make sure you have 1/8 inch metal screen on any vents you have, except your dryer vent, so that you're best protected in your vents. If you have 1/4 inch screen, which is common on a crawl space vents, I recommend do not remove it, because that helps with rodent control, keeps rodents out. Add, in addition to that, a 1/8 inch metal mesh. There are various ways to do it. People have come up with several here in town. Ace Hardware is a good resource because a lot of those people went there to find out how they could do it. So, otherwise, call me or email me and I'll help you out. So on the next slide, I wanted to go over kind of the effects of that 0 to 5, 0 to 10 foot zone. This is a little bit of research we did from the Almeida fire, where the wood fences and bark mulch were the things that burned the most often next to homes. And it allowed fire to be there against the house and over time do damage to it. Things like large shrubbery right next to the house in the center photo, we don't recommend that big of a shrub next to a house because of that eave exposure, because any more time of that shrub burning because of the radiant heat from the house next door that was on fire, it would have started burning too, more likely exposing that eave of the home here to more heat and flame and cause it to catch fire. The advantage here, though, is that it is a non-combustible, well, not a non-combustible, I'm sorry. It is a more fire-reluctant shrub than something like an arborvitae or a juniper, which would have ignited right away. And so these types of shrubs, if well maintained, can help deflect radiant heat and absorb it for a limited amount of time. That is the key part of it, though, a limited amount of time, because you can tell there was enough time for this bush to start burning. Luckily, the fire service was able to get there and help protect this house. Unfortunately, not the other one because it was too engulfed. The image on the right is fire starting from bark mulch and other small shrubs in that little corner between the fence and the wall. This is cement board siding. So even over time, cement board siding can start burning. And so be aware of what you have and don't think that just because I have cement board siding, I'm good and I can plant whatever I want. That isn't true. And you'll notice the trim corner piece on this wall is broken off because it was burning. A lot of the corner pieces on these homes are not also cement board. They are a press board of wood chip and glues. And so they are more susceptible than the siding itself. So be aware of those exposures. So plant spacing is critically important within the 0 to 5 foot zone. They are small, they're well spaced, they are lean, clean, and green. The next slide I'm going to show you is a before and after that we did several years back involving juniper and arborvitae. So as you know, with all the fires education I gave you already, you'll notice that arborvitae is right under the eaves. That is a exposure on all three fronts as far as fire is concerned. If that thing burns, it's radiating heat, it's right next to the house, and it's right under that eave. And all that juniper to the left of it was a bad omen. And so through grants, we're able to get it all removed. If you know where this house is, they've done a better job replanting, and it looks a lot nicer now and more fire safe than it was. Also, a common plant around here that is easy to grow because it does decently in our soils, even though they like tip over, are the mantonitas and madrones. But what we don't want is that overgrown from the ground up density in the vegetation. Thin it out. Okay. Get in there and prune out the dead of these bushes, because I also think they look better when they're pruned out. But it also removes a lot of that fine fuel. Because if you look at this slide, they removed a lot of the large stuff that was massed, because the height is that ladder effect that can reach that eave right there in the upper right corner, because it is on a slope and there's that eave exposure. So they're reducing the mass of vegetation to keep fire on the ground and out of the canopy of the shrubs. So maintenance is key. With fire-resistant landscaping, lean, clean, and green are the home ignition zones. It is the home, as a reminder, in relation to its surroundings of 100 to 200 feet. So this was a case study we did that Sharice actually helped us out with. And visually, this just helps us pay attention to that home ignition zone of the 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 foot zone. The home and its immediate surroundings up to approximately 30 feet. The green zone is at 30 foot. The yellow zone is out 10 feet. The red zone is out 5. And so in this landscaping architect's plans for a planting plan, there's a lot of plants being chosen there. Not all of them are the best idea. And you notice there isn't much spacing. And so paying attention to what these plants are, how they burn, what are they made up with, how easily can they dry out, are they drought tolerant, are you planting them with bark mulch underneath them for water retention in the soil? All these types of things you should evaluate before doing a planting or replanting. And these slides I'm sorry, these slides are in the wrong place, but on the slopes, the spacing matters. Typically advice is given on flat slopes. So mild or flat slopes is the standard spacing recommendations you'll see from most plant lists. And so be aware that if you have a steeper slope, which many of us do in Ashland, you're going to want to increase those spacing. As we get steeper, the distance between groupings of plants increases. Because it doesn't mean every single plant has to be spaced 4 times its height. It means if you have a small grouping of plants, the next grouping of plants is spaced to this distancing. It is an appropriate distance for fire safety around our homes to keep fire low intensity and on the ground, if it's going to be here at all. And as you get into very steep slopes, if you'll notice in Ashland, if you've ever been in the hills, some slopes are a lot steeper than this, even on the one on the right. And so that 6 times distance to height really matters. And sometimes you want to go even farther, depending on the slope and where your house is located. And what I would like to do is remind everyone that we have an Ashland Wildfire Mitigation Project, which is a FEMA pre-disaster mitigation grant. You may have heard about it in the newspaper. Luke Wimmer, who is our risk reduction specialist, is running this grant. He may reach out to you if you're watching. We are targeting the top 1,100 homes at risk in in Ashland, to get funds to those homeowners to help mitigate some of the wildfire risks on their property. And we're specifically targeting shake roof replacements and the highest risk homes based off a curbside assessment we did in 2018 that evaluated the entire community residential areas. So in this project, the grant coordinator, Luke Wimmer, performs the assessment at your house. They'll educate you about what is reimbursable as far as this grant is concerned. What kind of activities can you do that you can get money back for? You will receive a defensible space work plan, which is in the upper left there. The residents themselves hire the contractor or perform the work, or a combination of both. Receipts and proof of payments are necessary and need to be submitted. 75% of eligible costs are reimbursable, up to $2,150 for vegetation work. So what's not on here is the roof replacement. If you do have a wood shake roof in Ashland and you're looking to replace it, you can get up to $10,000 to help with that cost. So go to fireadapt@ashland.org, or at the end of this slideshow, you'll see my email, and reach out to me if you're interested because you have a wood shake roof or you think you may be on this list. Also currently, as of April 1st, we started the wildfire safety campaign. So if you go to fireadapt@ashland.org/wildfire prep, you can find a lot of the handouts you will soon be seeing in front of grocery stores or at Ace Hardware. These handouts themselves are great. It's a checklist that you can put on the fridge as a reminder to do a lot of the work. April is home hardening. The checklist is focused on what you can do to help keep embers from affecting the home itself. If an ember intrusion happens and lands on your home, on your deck, next to your walls. May is focused on vegetation. And that's kind of everything we talked about now in this course. And June is evacuation preparedness, and July is smoke preparedness. So check out our website and find some useful tips and tricks. We also have links to a lot of other info, especially on Smokewise Ashland, because unfortunately we do get smoke intrusions here now on a relatively regular basis. So we're adapting on many fronts. I'd also like to promote our wildfire risk assessment program. These are one-on-one wildfire risk home assessments. We currently have 6 trained volunteers and myself doing them. It's mostly volunteers at this point, but they have drastically improved our fire department's ability to come out to your home and help you assess your risks. So a lot of these things we talk about, even in the slides here in this class, it's hard to fully understand what that means on your property because there's a lot of info out there. None of it is actually telling you exactly what it is you should do, or you might not notice everything. And so these volunteers have been trained to help point things out, prioritize your list, and help you in the other way they can as a volunteer. New volunteer training is being developed, hopefully for the fall, to expand the program. Again, go to fireadaptedashland.org to find out more and sign up for your free home risk assessment. And lastly, we have Green Debris Drop-Off Day again this year. It is our 11th annual. We are partnered with Recology Ashland, who offers us one free day, and then we find the funding for a second because we found they've been so popular. Our typical Green Debris Drop-Off Day is the first weekend in May. It used to be on a Saturday. Since COVID, we moved it to a Sunday because we realized it's a whole lot easier to just have green debris drop-off on that day instead of competing with everybody else coming to the transfer station to drop off junk and other debris. So April 24th and May 8th, both Sundays from 8:30 to 3:30, free green debris drop-off. You can find more info on our website, either at ashland.or.us/green debris or fireadaptedashland.org. So we have 3 major websites in Ashland for wildfire safety and Smokewise, but the Fire Adapted Ashland, Smokewise Ashland, and the Ashland Watershed .org websites have a lot of information if you have more questions or we've piqued your interest and you want more info. So thank you for attending. It is now question and answer time. So we'll start doing that. Sharice is here, available to also help answer questions if it's specific vegetation. But Sarah, if you can help me out, we'll start going through the chat to help answer questions for everybody. And I will get off and let's see if we can see my face now.
Hi, Brian. Trying to go through here. We did have a question if there was funding to replace any wooden fences.
Great question. We currently do not. We are limited in our grant funds right now to the FEMA PDM grant, and it doesn't cover home hardening except for the roof replacement. But that doesn't mean we won't have funds. It just means not right now. SB 762, which was recently passed in Oregon, is bringing a significant amount of money, $220 million, into wildfire mitigation world. But it is a lot of money that a lot of agencies are still figuring out how to get it distributed. We're getting a lot closer, so we hope to see more grant funding opportunities in the next few months, and then within the next couple of years.
And another question was, what do you think of coconut mulch?
Be careful where you have it. Sharice might want to comment a little further on that. But Again, like with any mulch that is organic, if it dries out enough, it can burn. Some of it burns a lot less readily than others. And so do your research. We're hoping to do a case study, but University of Nevada also already did one. I'll have to do some research and maybe email her about coconut mulch. That's coconut husk, I'm guessing.
Well, coconut, the outside of the shell is fibrous. That would be highly flammable, and I would not recommend it at all. It would be like pine needles, but the harder shell-like material, if that's what the product's mostly composed on, it's very dense and would be hard to start on fire. But it's still not recommended except in isolation.
I agree.
And this may be a question for you, Charisse. What would soapy plants be? And that's a new concept, and someone wants a little explanation on that.
The term soap is actually referring to saponins. That's the material that essentially dissolves fat, a saponin. And if you wanted to know which plants have high saponin content, which contribute to the results in flammability testing, the Idaho testing lab actually shows for a large number of plants which ones have high soap content. I could also do some research if that person wants to get in touch with me for specific plants that are high in saponins. An example of another chemical component that you can look at directly is high latex content. If it has milky sap, it's probably got high latex content, and that is a low flammability plant, like the euphorbias.
Thank you, Charisse.
And one other question is, what are considered composted wood chips, and where do you purchase those? Brian, that might be one you can answer.
Sure. So companies like Biomass and Hilton locally do sell a composted wood chip. It basically means it spent some time in a pile with dirt and other debris, and so it's broken down a little bit. It just helps keep it from being, less flammable in that sense that it's not going to produce a big flame length, but it will still burn. It more smolders typically than produces a large flame. But if you go to any of your distributors locally, they'll pretty much know what you're talking about at this point. It would be harder to probably find at Home Depot or a place like that. But anywhere you can get mass amounts of rock or mulch, they're usually offering that one.
Can I say something here?
Absolutely.
One of the things in making a choice, even to have composted wood chips, is it will still generate as it burns and smolders, and there's no firefighters around because they're so stretched. It will dry the overlying plants, and they can ignite. So it's still an organic mulch that can actually spread fire, although more slowly. A better option would be to use very fine compost, which means it has few large pieces of carbon, like twigs or branches. The least amount of that material in an overlying mulch layer, the better.
Well, we are right at time at 6:15, and do you want to do one more question? I like to respect people's time, though, and it's up to you, Brian. We have one more question we could cover, and any question that we don't answer, we would follow up on.
I was ready for 6:30, so we can keep going if we want.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm sorry about that. We have a lot of great questions.
The two questions first and the question and answer chat window. One question was, any help for seniors? This is overwhelming. It can be. I recommend if you own your own property and you need help figuring out what to do and where to start, to request a home wildfire risk assessment through our RAP program. That will help get one of us out there to talk to you directly, figure out what your situation is. And then we'll be able to better direct any resources that are available. We are currently still exploring ways to get other volunteers out in the community to help those who are incapable of doing the work themselves and might not be able to afford it. That is being discussed in our Wildfire Safety Commission. And so stay tuned for that, because that is a work in progress. And then there was another question: is there any information locally for wildfire sprinkler systems? Locally, I'm not sure. I had one gentleman a few years back thinking to invent one. He's a scientist, but I haven't heard from him since COVID, so I'm not sure if he got any farther on it. But others are doing experimentation, research, and trying to develop products. There was a high school kid in the Bay Area who came up with one also that was mountable and independent. I don't know if he's selling it yet, but it was something he was trying to do on Kickstarter. You're really going to have to just get online and do research for those. Most of the systems that would be able to help keep your house from burning in a wildfire, especially if a neighbor's home was on fire, are very significant in nature and would cost a lot of money. So cheaper alternatives are being explored. The internet will probably be the best place to find out who's doing what where.
The other problem is that water, as we know in Talent, could not be supplied at a time when you think you could use your sprinklers.
Yes. And so that's where some of these Kickstarter ones that are getting off the ground in the past couple of years, they're focusing on foam tank systems so that they are independent from your water source. And they may only be able to spray a certain amount of area, so you need several of them. But those are things to look into depending on your situation. So let's get back to the chat window. Sarah, do you have any other questions that are standing out?
I had one question here from Rebecca. Are the zone distances for trees with large canopies measured from the edge of the canopy or from the trunk of the tree?
Edge of the canopy.
Yeah. So yeah, from the edge of the canopy, if they say you need 10 feet of spacing, they're talking about 10 feet between the trees so that you see that gap. Not from the tip of the tree to the tip of the tree, because that means they're next to each other and it's one canopy.
And we had another question from Anne. What about gas lines to the home that might explode? Is there any way to protect them?
Yeah, just like protecting the house itself, you're protecting all the utilities around that house, because most of those pipes come out of the ground near the home. So if you don't have a storage tank of propane or something like that, or in some cases kerosene if you live in the country, you have a pipe coming out of the ground near the house. So keep it free and clear of debris. Don't let vegetation grow around it. Don't store combustible items near them. That's the best you can do. A lot of the pipes, unfortunately, that were burning in the Talent area during the Almeda fire were because the house had already caught fire and broke the line. And so they ended up with blowtorches. And so, yes, just protect the pipes and the meters. Keep all that free and clear of vegetation and debris.
You can also turn off your tank if it's a barbecue tank or something like that, so the line is not charged.
Yes, and in that, if you have a line connected to the wall with your nice fancy barbecue, or you're tired of refilling your tank, so you put in a permanent line there, the hose is the most susceptible thing to heat because it's a rubber hose. So always, always, always turn that valve off when you're not using the barbecue or the fire pit, whichever you have that's using natural gas. Turn it off when it's not in use. And that way those hoses aren't, if they do catch fire because of something around it, it's not turning into a blowtorch where you have an unlimited supply of fuel pumping out of that pipe. All right, let's see. So one of the questions here was, do you have a list of landscape laborers who will do small jobs like transplanting flammable plants farther away from the house? All the larger landscape companies are interested in small jobs. Very understandable. We are working at expanding our contractors and service providers list right now. They are able to be found, the list we do have, on our website. Currently, the one for landscaping has about 7 or 8 contractors on there. Unfortunately, many of them are the larger companies. But you kind of have to call around. What we were really trying to do is push education to residents and consumers so that you're basically demanding from the people offering their service that they understand what wildfire mitigation means. They understand what hazard ignition zones are, and they can identify what type of plants are good, bad, and ugly around your house and make the appropriate recommendations. Because if the consumer asks for it, the people selling the product will adapt and they will offer that service because they want to stay in business. And that's really the market-driven part of our economy does have to go that way too. So ask questions, insist on a knowledgeable person. If you need help kind of trying to screen somebody, you can email us or give us a call to see if we've heard good or bad about them, but we don't typically directly recommend anyone as a government agency. It doesn't work out too well. So anyone who is on our list have agreed to abide by city ordinance, our wildfire safety ordinance, all our codes that are related to wildfire within the city of Ashland. And they agree to abide by the best practice recommendations we put out there. And so if they are on our list, they should be familiar with everything we're telling you. If not, maybe go to the next person. So. All right.
And do you have any recommendations for barbecues and home gas fire pits, Brian?
Recommendations is like type?
We do have guidance for what you can and can't have in the city of Ashland city limits listed on our fire department website, and I could get that link out to you for that guidance.
Yeah, as far as barbecues, it really depends on what you're doing, whether you prefer gas or charcoal or smokers. The important thing about a barbecue is just don't cook under your eaves necessarily. Make sure you're an appropriate and safe distance away from your house. You're turning on and off your valves only when needed so that those tanks are off or those gas lines are off. If you're walking away from it, make sure that charcoal is contained or out so that it is safer. When it comes to fire pits, check our website. There are certain types of fire pits and outdoor fireplaces that are not allowed in Ashland. Basically something that doesn't have a flue, like a chimney on it, and doesn't have a screen. Or it's a screen that you take off from the top that are still sold even at Ace Hardware, they're not technically allowed here because you're removing the screen to add more fuel, and that's when embers can come up and spread out and land somewhere else and cause trouble. And so you need a side access fireplace if it's a portable one. Or if you're building one, make sure you're feeding fuel to it from the side with something that's screened. There's a chimney with a spark arrestor on it. Right.
We had another question about green debris drop off, Brian. If people can bring their existing bark mulch for that drop off.
As far as I know, they're not going to turn it away, but I'll have to get back to you on that for sure, because Recology tries to make compost out of what we're letting people bring them. And so bark mulch may not be what they want.
The problem with bark mulch is that it's typically on the ground next to gravel and rock, and they cannot compost with their machinery bark mulch that has gravel in it. So they typically say you just put it in the garbage.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where it's better or much, much farther out away from home.
You can
Sorry, go ahead.
You can keep some on your property if it's isolated until it composts on its own. But the big rivers of it, you really need to break up and get rid of some of it.
Yes, breaking it up is the key part and keeping it away from structures. Otherwise, if it's far enough away, it's something that may be burning, could produce ember. But again, it's something that it's ember blowing to your house. So that's where that 0 to 5, 0 to 10 foot really matters. And you focus on keeping debris free and less combustible because you're preventing ember landing on your house. So good question here. Any advice for dealing with neighbors who don't maintain their bushes on the property line? Hopefully you're able to talk to them. There are many neighbors who may not speak to each other. Met some that haven't talked to each other for 20 years for something that happened a long time ago. But try to have a conversation. Don't be aggressive. Just try to have the conversation. Say, I'm interested in wildfire safety and preparing for an ember intrusion event. And these are the things I'm trying to do. These are my questions about the shrub row here. Find out why they don't do the work. Have just that casual, friendly conversation, because that may help determine options. Maybe they're physically incapable. Maybe they don't have enough money. Maybe both. Maybe they really dislike the vegetation. And so that's another conversation, is educating them to maybe see if they will change their mind. And if not, remove something, modify it, prune it up off the ground, get rid of the dead fuel in it, so that it's as safe as possible. But these are conversations we can have all the time and will continue to have. They are not always easy, but I do recommend staying calm, taking breaths, and start with a smile, because people, in this contested and political environment, we don't need a lot of drama on just neighborhood conversations. So remember, we're all in this together. So we're trying to find solutions, not create more problems.
And I think we have time for one more question, Brian, or a few more if we answer it quickly. Do you have a list of landscape laborers who do small jobs like transplanting flammable plants further away from the house? This person is finding that a lot of the larger landscape companies aren't interested in the small jobs.
Yeah, that one we answered. Have them go to the website, check out our contractors and service providers list there. Otherwise, places like Nextdoor, Facebook Marketplace, or even, heaven forbid, Craigslist or Angie's List, maybe places you can go to. We are trying to develop a service provider list for the Rogue Valley, because a lot of these landscapers work not just in Ashland, but all around the Rogue Valley. But that is a work in process currently, and we're working with Julie Smitherman to try to get more info on that and get that rolled out between here and Medford. Unfortunately, we just have the one list on our website currently. One quick question I can answer is, when will fire season officially begin this year? That is up to ODS to determine, Oregon Department of Forestry. All estimates currently, because of the drought conditions, are that fire season will most likely start in May again this year. So do work now. April is a great time to do it. May is another great time to do it. I do not recommend waiting till June to start cutting your tall grass, unless you absolutely have to wait. But once it starts drying, get it cut, thin out your vegetation, do a lot of the major work now before it gets hot and dry. I'll answer one more here. Do you know if Talent and Phoenix have a wildfire safety campaign? If not, what would you recommend a homeowner in these towns do to educate City Hall? Thank you. Take some of our flyers and show them to them. Anyone in Talent and Phoenix is welcome to any of our resources as far as our educational resources. They can be shared. You can utilize our websites. This is for everyone. And so anything we can do in that conversation, we're more than happy to help. They are setting up a nonprofit over there in that area to help with the rebuilding and mitigation and improving mitigation practices. Fire District 5 is doing stuff. So there's a lot going on right now, but if the people over there you're calling at City Hall or at the fire department don't know, reach out to us. We'll try to get you connected to the right people. Otherwise, thank you all so much. Sharice, again, thank you for all your research and work you've done to allow us to get a lot of this out. The plant list generator she has created is available on her website, and I'll let her plug it in a second. We're trying to figure out a way to get that link to ours. But that is she has researched over 695 plants already.
About 700.
About 700. To incorporate, whether or not they're a pollinator, drought tolerant, deer resistant, and all those aspects, along with, their fire reluctance or flammability rating. And so we don't, there aren't a whole lot of those types of lists out there. So this is kind of a first. And we're working to get it more peer reviewed so that hopefully a larger agency can pick it up and develop it further. But Sharice, if you want to plug that before we go.
The main thing I want to point out is that plant selection does matter, but what the science has shown by looking at all the plant lists all over the country is that all plant lists are bad in their current state because of lack of standardized methodology for determining flammability. Therefore, this plant list generator that was created tells you what multiple sources say about a species, and based on preponderance of evidence or opinion and growth form, you can make the choice yourself as to whether that plant is a good one for your location. And I'm not sure I can plug it, but if anybody is interested in the plant list generator, go to living-with-fire.org and click on the plant list generator key, and you'll get to see it, use it, download it. And we just sent an update out today, and we notify you of when updates are available.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll call that a night. Hope you enjoy your evening. Stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and enjoy your week. Good night.